And Tourette's really did it it informed so much about what it is to be your agency is stolen from you when you lose control of it's completely uh, you have no choice. There's no say in the matter. My brain is simply dysfunctional. Uh,
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Depending on where you listen to the Writing Glitch, I'm Cheri, your host here at the Writing Glitch. Dysgraphia. No pencil required. I believe that we can change the 21st century classroom and write and handwriting challenges by first exploring what kids understand visually and helping them to identify their emotional state about writing. You can learn more at cheri.org.com. And I just want to say before we get into interview with our guest today that on January 20th, 2024, John Lee Zupanzik and I held our first ever Tier 1 interventions workshop. We are going to be holding them monthly, so check out cheri.org.com for more details as to when the next one will be held. One of the clients came back to us after they heard the workshop and said, Tier 1 interventions was a sensitizing workshop, systematically thought through, put into easy to understand framework, and well presented. Thank you both. Thank you, Nilamina, for sharing that feedback with us. Today, I am introducing and interviewing Kristof Morrow. He is a veteran, author, and award-winning journalist. And one of the things that's very unique about Kristof is he has Tourette syndrome, similar to my son. In his debut book, The Second Sun, that's spelled S-U-N, is an adventure made in animate
Animus.
by animate by hundreds of distinct characters across half the world, written to confess through prose and tale our tendencies poisoned by Dickinson bleakness and to wholly ameliorate that cynicism by the light and courage of those who live and labor for a just peace. Wow, that is a lot and heavy. That's all I've got to say. Growing up, he was the third born, but the first to graduate from high school. He was viciously abused by his parents. They both have suffered from some form of addiction. Oh, that's horrible. He taught himself to write, served in the U.S. Navy as a corpsman right after high school, and after leaving that, he went to the university, which wasn't for him. And despite his love and look for short fiction, he wrote this book and came at it through his disabilities and his Tourette's. Every once in a while throughout this interview, you may hear very unusual noises, and that is part of Tourette syndrome. Welcome to the podcast, Kristof. It is great to have you here.
Thank you, Cheri. You're very kind to have me. Thank you.
So tell me about Kristof. I mean, that was a heavy introduction that came off the back of your book, but tell me a little bit about how that got started and where it's been going.
My book, Shakespeare. I began. I was told on October 16th, 2021, that by a work counselor in British Columbia that she couldn't find me work that was was compatible with my condition, given the criteria. So she told me that I should return to writing. And so I did. About 10 minutes later after that phone call, I stopped writing for 5 years after being diagnosed with Tourette's, and I started again 10 minutes later after that phone call. And Shakespeare, and I wrote the book, which is like, yeah,
It's not a thin one.
no, 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 it's not. Um, yeah, and I felt that I felt epic fantasy, based on Game of Thrones success, really the genre lends itself to alluding to like the present without it being direct. And in that way, it does a wonderful job of imparting what you need to, without being without dealing with any kind of prejudice. Um, uh, it's really it's a I try to make it a work of literature that is wearing the suit of epic fantasy, which is a bit of a unicorn because there's not a lot of works of literature that are in that genre because it's quite difficult to. Um, so yeah, I spent the first 2.5 months writing 162,000 words, basically Shakespeare. Yeah, and the second the first rewrite took over a year and a half, I think. Um, and it was very careful and very deliberate. It really does have hundreds of characters. And the prevailing view is that it's impossible to choose a favorite because they're so distinct, and some of them are very lovely for some reasons. And there's villains. The one thing that I did omit, it has slavery, it has empire, it has rebellion, civil war, it has the complex, like the decay of complex natural systems that we see in climate change, because climate change is a large part of that conversation, and it's being induced by something in the book that you would read, and I really hoped to explore, like I'd rather be comprehensive um, in terms of like the kinds of experiences that are in there. The two things that I omitted were sexism and racism because I felt I'm probably the least qualified to discuss that. And also, I feel like everybody hears about it a lot, and I wanted it to be Shakespeare. I wanted it to be an adventure for everyone. Yeah, and so I love my work.
So, how did the Tourette syndrome interfere or benefit you while you were writing?
Well, it it offered me that I really had no choice. It was do or die. I was either going to do something of substance, or I would be so emotionally distraught that I wouldn't be able to live like that. I was terrified of living an inconsequential life, and so I wanted to make my time worthwhile. And uh, fortunately, there's like I do receive like assistance from the province and everything, so I can live Shakespeare, and I work at home. I've already written volume 3. I'm on the last chapter of that. It's 110,000 words right now, but it's the first draft, and it's a single volume rather than the first two like this one is, my debut book. And Tourette's really did a it it informed so much about what it is to be uh, your agency is stolen from you when you lose control of it's completely uh, you have no choice. There's no say in the matter. My brain is simply dysfunctional, and so it was um, it was really uh, it was really devastating for a long time, and it has like increasingly become more aggressive, and it's manifest. And for example, right now I use my fingers, and I'll gouge my own eyes out. I punch myself in the face. I jab myself in the throat. Um, I mean, I've given myself black eyes, bloody lips. I've had to go to the hospital several times for it. Um, and I lost the use of my thumb for a long time, for several months, because I hit it on something, and you can't really see it, but this finger is quite well, yeah, it's been overwrought. Mm.
Tell me a little bit more about
Shakespeare.
the beginning. Um, because I don't know that a lot of people understand what Tourette syndrome is.
Shakespeare.
How did you figure out that it was Tourette's? What was going on? What were some of the things that you were noticing about you that
Mhm.
created Tourette's
Right.
in your
What?
system. And body. I
Right.
guess created is the wrong word, but
Yeah, yeah, it encouraged the symptoms to eventually, yeah. So when I was 19 at Shakespeare, I before the age of 19, I had no, I was not symptomatic at all of Tourette's. When I joined the Navy, um, it's an extraordinary amount of pressure. I finished boot camp A school when I was serving at a hospital in Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, Florida. When I had what I felt like a seizure was a seizure. Um, and before that happened though, I remember feeling which a kind of aura, which I learned later is is a telltale sign for people with seizure disorders. There's a feeling like something's wrong, and and a sort of dread took over. And I realized when I had the seizure, I was in the hospital for 3 days, um, in the ICU, and I had several more, which I know now were tic attacks, um, because I was conscious for it, and I um, I didn't experience any more symptoms for several years, and then I would have one day, like 3 years later, maybe I had one day where so I felt really weird in my body, felt like I couldn't control it, and then it stopped, and then a couple years later, it started again, and then by the time I was 25, I started to experience a consistent symptom, which was that I would grunt, and my muscles in my stomach, my abdomen would tighten. I had no idea that was Tourette's. It went on for it was every day, all the time for 2 years. Shakespeare. So I'm 27 now. I was working as a 911 dispatcher at the time, which was a very difficult job, um, and especially for someone with Tourette's. It's a radio. You're on the radio. Yeah. It doesn't really lend itself to that career. Anyway, so I got a job as a journalist at a newspaper. At the newspaper, I won 2 awards from the Texas Press Association and the South Texas Press Association for writing and for photography. And yeah, and I those symptoms became much more aggressive, and so that's, I mean, really, it's become what it is basically today.
Hmm.
Shakespeare. Mm.
It's very interesting what you say, and I'm trying to share. I haven't really shared this much on the podcast. Michael didn't really have symptoms when he was 11-ish. I want to say 11. I had to take him for uh some testing because we thought he was having petit mal seizures. And if I
Mhm.
look back and listening to what you're saying, they were
Mhm.
probably his first signs of tics.
Mhm.
But it was more of a freeze and a stillness in his body rather
Mhm.
than a shake. And then you mentioned something about your gut.
Mhm.
And Michael says to me all the time, he's like, I don't know that I'm hungry until my body hurts.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And I thought that is the strangest
Mhm.
feeling
Mhm.
that your body creates a pain receptor instead of a trigger to say, hey, you're hungry.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I thought that was unique to him, but now you're making me think it's part of the Tourette syndrome in general.
Shakespeare.
And he started out shortly after
Shakespeare.
he got his COVID shot, where we're sitting and he was and I were working on a website and he starts twitching.
Shakespeare.
And a little while later, he did the same movement.
Mhm.
And a little while. So initially, when I first noticed that it was a possible tick and made
Mhm.
that association,
Mhm.
it was February of
Shakespeare.
2001, and it was
Changed my
about 5 times in 1 minute. Now, the poor kid, around 5 o'clock, he will tick constantly for 4 hours,
Shakespeare.
from
Yeah.
5 to 9 every night. Now, I know that he has to take medicine to sleep. I'm sure you do too.
Shakespeare. Shakespeare.
and mornings are a little bit better after he has
Yeah.
some rest. So
Shakespeare.
does that sound
Yeah,
similar?
that's consistent with I experience them pretty much from maybe like 10 o'clock in the morning, Shakespeare, and for the rest of the day. Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier, I wear a helmet now to protect my eyes from myself and my face. Um, and actually, it looks. I'll show it to you later. But it can be exacerbated. The symptoms is a perfect storm, Shakespeare. My symptoms flirt with each other. You know, the OCD, ADHD, um, and depression, anxiety, um, and being on the autism spectrum, of course, and uh, the abuse that I experienced sort of created a pathological need to injure myself for whenever I feel shame, and which is obviously associated with Tourette's and OCD. So it's yeah, it's really quite dangerous for me generally, all the time.
Wow. Oh, wow. So how did the Tourette's impact your writing? Did you use a paper and pencil to write? Were you specifically using the computer? Were you using speech to text? Were you typing? Like, how did the movement interfere or help the writing process?
Um, it really I can't hold sharp objects anymore because I stab myself. And so I don't use pens and paper. I write on a computer. Almost exclusively. I have a journal that I kept for some time, but when I started using the pen and to stab myself in the neck, I couldn't do it anymore. And so yeah.
Okay. Michael throws the phone a lot. He has to
Yeah,
have a really good uh,
case. Yeah.
powder box around it because he's
Hmm.
constantly throwing it.
Yep. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, that's happened
Uh,
to me a bunch of
yeah.
times.
So you use the computer. Let
Mhm.
me let me go back there a second. Do you do a lot of speech to text then?
Shakespeare. No, Shakespeare. No,
You
not generally.
keyboarding?
Speech to text is actually more. Uh, m- much much of my tics are vocal tics and involve my head and or my hands, right? Which sounds intuitive, right? But it's not. There are so many. For example, I had a tic for a day. It was just a single day where I was stomping my foot, and by the time after an hour of stomping your foot, you can't walk anymore.
Hmm.
So you just have to lay down and just wait for it to stop. There
Yeah,
are
I've been kicked more than once.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's I have a Shakespeare. An elderly cat named Sparkles who has quite a lovely. She's almost 20 years old. She's very lovely. But I when I pet her, I have to be careful being near her ears because I'll scream. Like
Hmm.
I actually when I lived in like apartment buildings and stuff, I would go to like the neighbors and say, if you hear someone that it sounds like they're being tortured, and then it's not that it's because I have Tourette's. So that's what it sounds like. It sounds like that's what's happening.
Hmm.
Truly, like if you put it in a movie, it would be appropriate if that were the context of the situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Michael whistles a lot.
Shakespeare, and the most uh, prevalent vocal tick though I have is I say Shakespeare, so which is uh, fortuitous, really, truly. I'm 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 quite yeah. I'm happy with that. I'm fine with that. Shakespeare. Mm. Yeah,
Yeah. Michael whistles.
yeah.
He was a musician,
Shakespeare.
and so he does a lot of the
Shakespeare.
patterns that he did while he used to sing, but he doesn't
Hmm.
sing for me anymore.
Oh.
Uh, yeah, that's crazy. It's
Mm.
It's just so different. I keep trying to learn more,
Yeah.
and that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast when I learned more about you,
Shakespeare.
because I, yes, I know you wanted to share about your journal, but I really wanted to delve into the Tourette's and how it manifests. So what are you doing with yourself now? You're still writing,
Shakespeare.
you're writing the book. What else are you doing?
Well, I do a number of things. Um I teach writing myself, actually. I do writing tutoring.
Okay.
I do it for free. And I do it, it's for we go for an hour or more, and we go word for word over what they've done. It's a very lovely time. I love to talk to craft. It's my favorite thing in the world. I describe it as, when I say I love it more than the sum of my love for all of the things. And Shakespeare. I spend time with my little brother, um, who he's aloof, but he's a good kid. Um, I actually
Does
Shakespeare.
he also have Tourette's?
No, he does not.
No. Okay.
No, but he does have every other comorbid condition: the anxiety,
Mm.
depression, OCD. Yeah, he does ADHD. He does not have it much easier Shakespeare than I do. Um, but the amount of abuse he and I received is completely is polar opposites. He was not so much. He was more emotionally abused. Yeah, and yeah, mine was much more physical all the time. Shakespeare, Shakespeare, Shakespeare. Hmm.
And and are you in a relationship with a significant other?
Shakespeare,
How does the Tourette's work with
Shakespeare,
that?
Shakespeare. Well, I was I was married. Uh, I was, and I I have to respect that. It really is a difficult condition. Shakespeare. Because I couldn't work at a normal job. Mm, uh, that put a lot of stress on our relationship and a number of other factors. But I experienced a great deal of anxiety before I published the book, because again, I wanted to live a life of consequence, and I wanted my work to reflect that. Uh, and so far, I've every report I've gotten encourages that view. Um, and I've sort of, in my life, I don't think I've ever been happier. Hmm. Shakespeare, Shakespeare,
How do people find out about you? You think you told me a little bit about TikTok. Like, what's going on with TikTok?
Shakespeare. I went I went viral at the end of June, beginning of July. Shakespeare. I Shakespeare. When I published the book, uh, I didn't have anyone reading it, but I started a TikTok account 3 weeks before I went viral. So for the first 3 weeks, I just discussed Tourette's, and what it's like to live and have to be out in public with it, because when I was working at Starbucks, um, the drive-through, Shakespeare, which was the only position that was really compatible with my condition, because for all the reasons that we've already named. And I had a very lovely manager and very lovely coworkers who facilitated that. And Shakespeare, even though I was often laughed at, and it was, again, I've learned to realize that it wasn't malicious. Often people didn't know what was happening. They thought I'm Shakespeare. Everyone knew that I was a redneck living in Canada. They knew I was from Texas, and they thought this is just a cowboy, losing his, and so um, it but it really wounded my self-worth anyway,
Mm.
because it makes you even more aware of it, and it's one of those things that Shakespeare, I thought that people eventually grew accustomed to hearing it, and then they could be able to tune it out, but apparently that's not the case, and you hear it every time. Shakespeare,
Yeah, I have trouble when Michael gets
Shakespeare.
into a pattern that he's
Hmm.
whistling constantly.
Hmm.
Um, Michael has gone to help himself when he's getting really bad.
Mhm.
He drums, but he's going to have to find some way to protect his legs because he keeps missing the drums and he keeps hitting himself at full force
Yeah.
with a drumstick,
Mhm.
and the black and blues are getting out of hand. Um,
Yeah.
but that's one of the ways that he's been able to find an outlet is he drums. Sometimes that can get very loud, but the whistling is irritating for me because I have auditory sensitivity. And so the combination really can be grating. So I understand what you're saying. He also isolates a lot. And I think it's just a result of the tics being so constant. And to me, it's heartbreaking.
Shakespeare.
It's
I mean, as
heartbreaking to
someone who
see.
with Tourette's, I would hope not that no one would describe my tics as irritating, because that would really hurt my feelings. Because it's not, of course, it's not intentional, but it's not deliberate in any sense, um, and really, we're already aware of that.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
it
I'm aware
doesn't,
of it.
you know.
Yeah, I'm aware of it and I've
Mhm.
gotten used to it, but especially when it was
Shakespeare,
first happening, it
Shakespeare.
was like, why can't he stop? He can't stop. I know that. But
Yeah,
it took
it's
it
yeah.
it 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 is something to kind of get used to. And it is harder to get used to that. So
But there is a
uh,
grieving period, you know. It's a grief. You have grief about it. Shakespeare. I remember reading someone very dear to me was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and my ex at the time, we were looking into this situation, and there was a woman who had a sister who had schizophrenia, and she went through the same thing. She actually blamed her sister. She went through this whole period of it was a really contentious relationship for a long time. But then, it's something that she had to eventually she eventually, I think, got over the grieving period. It takes a long time, though. It can take years um before they realize that of course it's not their fault. um yeah.
yeah, I've blamed myself.
Hmm.
I've blamed myself for this whole uh thing,
Shakespeare,
and I
Shakespeare.
know that I had no control over it. It wasn't
Mhm.
something that I gave to him intentionally. So
Mhm.
yeah, I understand exactly what
Shakespeare.
your friend was feeling. Um,
Mhm.
Now we're about running out of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about Tourette's or writing or anything that you're doing that you'd like to share before we go?